All right, so let's begin with the prayer in the name of the Father and of the Son and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Heavenly Father and good and gracious God, you leave traces of yourself everywhere in creation, for the mind that wants to seek you and for the heart that thirsts for you. We ask you to anoint our time together as we seek to grow in that knowledge and love. And we entrust this to Our Lady as we pray, Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Very good. All right. Our objectives for this class today. First, we want to be able to explain the difference between proofs from creation, right? The world around us, and proofs from the human person, those proofs that are contained within us. And then second, we'll be able to summarize the basic points of two different arguments for God's existence. All right, and then third, we will look to answering one of the two arguments that claim to disprove God's existence. So before we begin, we're going to do some review of the last class, all right? I want you to take a piece of paper and complete the two sentences right on the slide. And you have 3 minutes. Go. All right. Before we review your answers, I want to hear a few fascinating facts about learning. And, you know, the research that's been done on memorization indicates that the human mind must encounter a topic at least 3 different times for it to go from our short-term memory to our long-term memory. So if you want to learn something, you have to at least encounter it again 5 minutes after you learned it, and then 24 hours after that, and then 7 days later. So if you want to remember anything, you must manipulate that concept in your mind at least 5 times. So if you're looking at this information and you think, I hardly remembered any of these words, that's normal, right? Putting concepts together and getting this into your daily vocabulary takes practice, and that's why we're doing it here, okay? Now, who thinks it's got a good reason as to how someone might respond to this first objection? Religion is opium for the masses. What's a good response to that? Anybody? Oh, come on. Somebody's got to. How are you going to respond? I walk up to you and say, you're an idiot. Religion is opium for the masses. What are you going to say? All right. You're just going to let me call you an idiot then, huh? I'm standing outside of 10:30 Mass. You're all coming out after Mass, and I'm saying you're a bunch of fools. Religion's opium for the masses. You just going to walk by and go to your cars?
I'm going to say, why do you say that?
Because
and let them explain.
Because it is. All right, back to you.
Give me more of a definition. Like, what do you mean by that? And specifically, like
Okay.
why? Oh.
Okay.
Religion is like a drug for the masses. It just puts them into this stupor. They're unconscious of reality. All right, there's my answer. Yes, Bridget.
Yes, I would try to bring some of my own personal testimony into it, my personal experience, as to why personal to me versus a mass. I don't know.
Okay, so think about this for a second. What's implied when someone says religion is opium for the masses? What does opium do?
Numbs you.
It numbs, right? It dulls your senses, right? Does God do that?
No.
Right? Does God limit our freedom?
No.
No. Does a drug limit your freedom?
Yes.
Why?
Because it makes you dysfunctional. You can't function because of your altered mental state, which God does not put you in an altered mental state, but gives you clarity.
Correct. So, it's addictive, right? Right. And that addiction means you can't function without it. So here, the point is, God does not dull or limit our freedom like a drug does, like opium does. He makes us more free. Now, during the last class that Terry taught, she talked about what it meant by God, what we mean by God, and what we do not mean by God. And she said that God was capable of coming close to humanity, right? Of interacting with humanity while not oppressing humanity. So anyone remember the biblical image we use for where we are, where we saw that? What was the image that Terry talked about? God getting close to humanity.
The burning bush.
Correct. The burning bush, right?
Yes.
Okay, so God can come close to humanity, just like an example of the burning bush, but God can be actually and directly in our world, in this case as a flame, but he doesn't consume the bush the way fire normally or naturally would, right? The other character we saw God acting on in this way is who?
Mary.
Mary, that's correct. When God came close to Mary, she did not become less free. She became more free, more beautiful, right? So the person making the objection, religion is a drug, is what keeps you dull, has precisely the opposite understanding of religion and who God is. God is not someone who oppresses. God is someone who makes us truly free. This is an important concept to which we'll return to later. The second question, I don't believe in God because he's like a fairy tale. There is about as much evidence for God as there is for Santa Claus or the Tooth Fairy. So this phrase does not take into account what? How would you answer this? I walk up to you and say, your God is a fairy tale. What do you say?
Well, first of all, you're acknowledging that those things exist in order to call it something. So, so,
That's interesting.
so you can start with that and say, well, so if you don't believe that, if you believe that, then you don't believe in love. You don't believe in anything that's tangible, that's not tangible, and it's all just based. So
Right. So what's the word we used in my very first session? What did we talk about? The atheist favorite tool is what? Reductionism. Right. So this is a reductionist statement because it does what?
it reduces everything to just one point.
There you go. Because it limits God to what can fit within human parameters, right? They're limiting the ways we can know God to just experiments and observation. So what are the other two ways of knowing? Come on, guys, make me proud,
Testimony,
right?
And
And
logic.
logic, very good.
Experience, logic.
That's right. Experience is the experimentation and observation. So experience, logic, testimony, right? So what is the term we use for the three ways of knowing? The other big word from the,
Reason.
what?
Reason.
No. The three terms, it's the philosophy of how we know things. What is that? That's a long word. It's epistemology. All right. How we know, right? So this phrase that this objection is an example of reductionism. They're reducing all of human knowledge down to scientific observation, and that's just not common sense, right? If we only accepted the things that could be proved observationally, we would limit our knowledge in a pretty significant way. In fact, this very statement's not scientific, but it's an expression of a philosophy. All right. So now we're going to go on to our topic for this class, and here are some terms and concepts that we need to understand in order to go forward. Before we talk about these two different kinds of proofs, we should probably talk about proof, the word proof in the first place. When I'm talking about a proof for God's existence, it should be obvious at this point that I'm not talking about a scientific proof for this. I'm talking about ways of reasoning, ways of using logic to arrive at a conclusion that there is a God. So in other words, showing that belief in God is reasonable. This is what we mean by a proof of God's existence. So we're clear, these proofs are not necessarily ironclad, foolproof, or trump cards when speaking with an atheist. If we approach them as such, we will be a little bit disappointed. Now, experts in the area of apologetics will tell you that it is highly unusual to convert anyone with any of these arguments. So you may ask, why should we learn this stuff? Well, there are 3 very good reasons for learning about these proofs. First, because it's an honor to speak correctly on God's behalf. Too many people have spoken incorrectly about him. Second, it gives believers a sense that their faith is built upon a strong foundation. And then 3, because we must dispel the ridiculous notion that Christians are foolish. And that's why we use these proofs. Now, hopefully, the person that we're dialoguing with, even though they may not walk away with a certainty that God exists, they may at least walk away thinking that Christianity is not dumb or foolish, and that we actually have reasons for what we believe. If they walk away with those kinds of thoughts, that's a win. It could be the beginning of something growing in their heart. We're there to plant the seed, and you planted the seed. Now, there are lots of proofs for God's existence. There's a book that actually is listed on your handout at the end if you're interested in. It's called The Handbook of Catholic Apologetics, and it's been on my bookshelf for a very, very long time, and for good reasons. So it should be in every Catholic home. It's called The Handbook of Catholic Apologetics. Peter Kreeft and Father Ciccelli wrote that book, right? The 2 authors, one of which again is Peter Kreeft, give you 20 different proofs for God's existence. So if you want to delve further into Christian apologetics, you should definitely check this book out. It's a great resource, but it also covers a wide array of apologetic topics. Now, since 20 proofs would be a bit overwhelming to discuss in the time we have, we're going to present 2 today and in the next talk, right, with Terry. There are 2 basic categories for proofs for God's existence, right? The first, there are proofs that start with data from the created world, and using our reasoning, we establish a connection back to God. They start with data from the created world and reason from the created world back to God. These are called cosmological arguments for God's existence. Okay, cosmological arguments. Cosmological meaning from the world around us. Cosmological arguments look at the created world, right, the cosmos, and start reasoning their way back to God. They are not scientific in the strictest sense. They fall more under logic, but they will occasionally use some scientific data as a launching point. The other kind of argument for God's existence, of which there are many, takes its data not from outside the world, but from inside of the human person. And these are called psychological arguments for God's existence. And they move very differently from cosmological arguments. All these arguments are like tools. Every argument does not work with every atheist. You need the right tool, right argument to fit the correct atheist to whom we're speaking. It's our job to consider with whom am I speaking and which argument will actually be the most useful for them. Key point here, useful for them, not for you to win the argument. Useful for them, right? Pastoral response. For someone that's very scientifically minded, the cosmological arguments might be the better place to start. But for someone who's very deep and intuitive in what it means to be human, maybe the psychological arguments can be the better place to go. So let's talk about 2 of the cosmological proofs. The first is the argument from contingency, and the second is the argument from design. And the root of the word contingency, contingent, refers to something that's dependent on something else. So when we look at the universe, we notice that some features of things are absolutely necessary for those things, and some features are not necessary for those things. And I have a real simple example to explain this, okay? This is what is in front of you. What is this?
Triangle.
Triangle. All right, you passed, right? A triangle has some features that are absolutely necessary if it is to be a triangle. What are those features?
Equal size.
Three
Angles,
sides, right? What else?
three angles,
Excuse me?
three,
Three angles? Yeah, but what is it about those angles that's very specific?
They're 45-degree angles.
No. They have to total 180 degrees,
Okay.
right?
That's, yeah.
Right? So a triangle has three sides and all angles have to equal 180 degrees, right? Those are the essential features of a triangle. It would not be a triangle without those features, correct? Everybody in agreement? All right, good. Now, they must have three sides and some of the angles must be 180 degrees. All right, now, there are other features of triangles, all of which can vary to any degree, and we call these the non-essential features. For instance, the size of the triangle could be big or small, or it could be equilateral. It could be an isosceles triangle or whatever. It could be blue. It could be red, right? It could be made out of ink on paper. It could be made out of wood. But the point is, those features are not required for the triangle, are they? So we have two kinds of features, essential features and non-essential features, all right? So if you look at triangles, you got color, shape, color, material. These are all non-essential features, all right? Now, about those essential features, if someone were to ask you, why does a triangle have three sides? Your answer would probably be because that's what a triangle is. Because that's the definition of what we mean by a triangle. But if someone asked me instead, why is that triangle blue? Then my answer moves in a totally different direction. I have to respond with a cause for why that triangle's blue. So this triangle example is to help you see the difference when discussing essential and non-essential features. When you ask about why an essential feature is the way it is, it's because that's the way it is. But if you ask about a non-essential feature, you have to find a cause for it. So the first kind of feature is essential, and the second kind of feature is non-essential. Non-essential features require causes, and essential features do not need causes. Now, when we look around at the universe, we see many different things, and these many things have many different features. For example, cars, cows, clouds, stars, our best friends, are all things in this universe. They all have different features, and they have features that make them what they are. And they have other features that can change. For example, cars can be big or small, different colors. Cows may or may not have horns or spots, and clouds have different shapes. But what is very interesting is that none of these things, none, possess existence as an essential feature. For everything in this universe, existence is a non-essential feature of that thing, which means they didn't have to exist. So what do we mean by that? It means everything I mentioned, cars, clouds, etc., there was a time when it didn't exist, and there will be a time in the future when it will not exist again. Cows have a lifespan. So does my truck, unfortunately. All of these things have existence, but the existence is not essential to what they are. How do we know that? Because if they did possess existence as an essential feature, they would have always existed. Here's another way of looking at it. If I look at Terry over here, right, my adult supervision, where did Terry come from, right? And to answer that question, we must remember that with non-essential features, there must always be a cause. So to answer the question, we might reply, Terry came from her parents. But that answer raises a problem. Do Terry's parents possess existence as an essential feature? No. So in order to answer the first question, we need to ask, from where did Terry's parents come? And again, we'll answer, well, each one of them had two different parents, and you quickly realize how this can go on and on and on. You have to keep asking questions about existence, okay? This is the argument from contingency. This is what we're talking about here. Everything in the universe is like this. Everything in the universe does not possess existence as an essential feature, which means that logically there must be something outside of the universe that has to exist, that is the source of existence, and then that is the thing we call God, right? So here's an analogy to help kind of understand this. Suppose we take a normal nail and we place it against the ceiling and the nail sticks to the ceiling. And then we take another nail and touch it to the bottom of the first nail that's hanging there, and it sticks to the first nail. So now that we have two nails touching end to end hanging from the ceiling. We continue doing this until we have a string of nails all the way down to the floor. Question, what is causing the nails to stick together?
Magnetic force.
Magnetic force, right? The nails have been magnetized. However, we know that these nails are not normally magnetized, right? They do not possess magnetism as an essential feature, which means there must be a cause. So what do? We have this amazing string of nails hanging from the ceiling, and when we get to the nail touching the ceiling, we cannot see anything beyond the ceiling. We just see the ceiling tile, right?
Right.
All right. Now, what can we reasonably assume is on the other side of the ceiling?
A magnet.
A magnet. Yeah, we can reasonably assume that. We may not see it, we can't smell it, we can't hear it, we can't sense it, but we can reasonably deduce that there must be a source for the magnetism because none of the nails have magnetism as an essential feature. Okay? Now, in the argument from contingency, let's see. All right. We're going to do that. Here you go. This is the exact thing this is exactly the same thing we do with God. We look at everything in the universe and we see that everything gets its existence from something else. But that existence has to be from somewhere, and it can't be anything inside this universe. So there must be something outside the universe. So what's tricky about this argument from contingency? Right? Let me go back to the argument, lay it out there. So the first premise is things that do not have to exist require an explanation for their existence. Second premise, the only thing that can explain the existence of things that do not have to exist is something that does have to exist. Conclusion, there's at least one thing that doesn't have to exist, and that thing we call God. Okay? Now, what's tricky about that argument? What's tricky about that argument?
Can't see it. You can't see the magnet. You can't see God. It's not.
Well, but the magnet had to come from somewhere, and that's where their argument is going to be. Somebody had to go up there and put the magnet in order for the nails to hang.
Yeah, well, what's tricky about this argument from an apologetic perspective? It makes you assume that it's God, right?
Mm-hmm.
After all, it could be something else. So this is an important detail here. By this proof, we have only proved that there is something that is not physical. In other words, if you believe this, you're not an atheist anymore, but neither are you a Christian, okay? You can believe this and not be a Christian. Do you see what I mean? Okay? Now, Peter Cree puts it this way. These proofs of God are only prove very thin slices of what we mean by God, right? So when we attend Mass and the priest or deacon speaks about God, we assume that they're speaking about the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. The God that sent his son that became incarnate in the Virgin Mary, the God who became fully human. This particular proof for God's existence proves none of these things. The only thing it proves is the existence of something outside the universe, something that must exist and is the cause of everything else. That's the only thing that we proved. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. Now remember,
Would you say that one more time? What that proves is that there is something outside of the universe. Did I get that right?
That must exist, that has existence as an essential feature, right?
Okay.
Right? That's the only thing we proved. We didn't prove it was a God that we believe in, okay? But we did prove that there's a force outside the existence, outside of, our existence, that has existence as an essential feature, all right? Now, remember earlier in this class, we said that God was existence itself. We said that God was the sheer act of to be, and God revealed this when he told Moses, I am who am, right? So he is existence. Now, this is fascinating when you compare the argument from contingency with the name God gave himself in the Bible. We should be able to notice that the two things match, that they go together. We are saying he is existence itself, and God is telling us, I am the act of to be. Okay. Everybody with me so far? Okay. Now, right now, I want you to brainstorm the possible objections to the argument from contingency. I give you about a minute. Go. I want everybody to have an objection, all right? I'm going to be your nightmare of an atheist waiting for you after Mass, all right? All right. Who's got an objection? Anybody?
I do.
Okay, go ahead.
And I really heard this. They say it started with the Big Bang, like that explains everything, when I know that something had to cause a Big Bang.
Right. Well, we'll talk about that at the very end. We'll talk about how science and theology are converging in that point, right? But
Yeah.
okay.
But I mean, when I was talking to somebody, I was actually listening to Gus Lloyd on the Catholic channel, and
Okay.
he was talking to somebody who, when he explained all this, said, no, it started with the Big Bang. There's no God. There started with the Big Bang. So
Right.
that's
Well,
why I thought of that.
okay. That's interesting on his part. He's probably not up on the latest science. Any other objections? No one else has an objection? Huh. All right. So
No, don't get me wrong. Gus Lloyd, the other guy said it to Gus Lloyd.
Okay. No.
Gus Lloyd doesn't think it started with the Big Bang.
Okay, very good. Good
Um,
for Gus.
But my thing was what set it in motion in the first place?
Yeah.
what set everything in motion in the first place. And that would be the beginning of the argument.
Yeah, I would say God, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, some of the atheists will argue that the argument from contingency sets off this infinite change of cause and effect that goes on forever.
Right.
So, what if this cause and effect goes on forever? So let's pretend we're scientists for a moment and we're asking this really that's kind of a silly question, but how do fish breathe underwater? And one of your fellow scientists replies, well, fish have always breathed underwater. So you're a scientist. So what do you think of that response? It doesn't answer the question, right? This is important because scientifically, a scientist would never accept this. So why should you accept it? Because we look at the universe, nothing in the universe possesses existence itself. Nothing had to exist, but it does. So from where does it come? Someone that says, well, let's just say it goes on forever is not being intellectually honest because they're leaving an interesting and critical question unanswered. Now, some atheists will say that even a 5-year-old can disprove God's existence by simply asking, what caused God? Right? I'm surprised some of you didn't even come up with that, right? The person who asks this often has one or both of the following misunderstandings. The first is that they mistakenly think that the argument of contingency says all things have causes. That's not what the argument says. We're not saying all things have causes. There are a lot of atheists that say this. They say, well, everything has a cause, right? Well, what caused God? Actually, we're not saying everything had causes. We're saying only certain kinds of features have causes. And those are, what kind of features?
Essential.
Non-essential features, right, have causes. Essential features don't need causes because they are there. They explain themselves. So the person that asks this often has never actually studied the proofs for God's existence at all, or if they have, they misunderstood them. That's the one important aspect of this. The argument does not say all things have causes. Only things that don't explain themselves need causes, which brings us to the triangle. Again, remember the child that asked, why do triangles have 3 sides? What's the answer? That's the definition of what we mean by a triangle. It's that simple. So when someone asks what caused God, I can honestly say, I'm not sure you and I are understanding what we mean by God. Because what I mean by God is that which possesses existence as his essence. It is his essential feature, that which possesses existence as its essence. In other words, that's what we mean by God. Now, some really, really feisty people will say, oh, you're just pulling a fast one on me because you're defining God as the one thing that is. And I said, no, I didn't do that. I reasoned, using my mind, that there must be something like that. I didn't assume he existed and then made you back into it, right? That's called begging the question. What I did was very simple. I looked at this big material universe, and there must be a source of this existence that possesses existence by itself, and no one gave it to him. That's what I mean by God. Scientists are increasingly moving to the view that the Big Bang required a force that existed before the Big Bang, something or someone that existed before the creation of our universe. So we're clear on this. We reasoned our way to knowing there must be a source of this existence that possesses existence by itself, and no one gave it to him. What was that reasoning process, right? We reasoned that it had to exist because none of us possess existence as an essential feature, but there has to be at least one thing that does. It's very logical. But you may ask, fair question, how do you know it's God? Because that's how we are defining God, the source of all existence. It's the definition we get to when we use reason. From there, we get to know or learn about this source of all existence, God. And this is where religion comes into the picture. So let's pretend for a moment you never heard the word God ever before in your life, ever. And we said, look, things exist, but things don't have to exist. If we trace all those things back to the beginning of the universe, there must be one thing for which existence was essential. Right? So all we Christians are saying for this particular argument is that the one thing for which existence is essential is God. We are saying God cannot be in the universe because the universe does not possess existence as an essential feature. So God must be outside of the universe. So you see, all I'm using right now is logic. Now, I'm taking my Catholic hat off because I have to find something we can talk about with the atheist because he's not Catholic. What we're saying is you don't have to be Catholic to believe in God. All you have to do is think. Now, that won't make you a Christian, but at the very least, it opens you up to a conversation of, you know, there are a lot of different versions of God out there amongst humans. I wonder which one is the right one. And at this point, you're not an atheist anymore, okay? God is not in the universe, but he is ever present. However, the way God is not present the same way you and I are present in the world, right? Okay? God is holding everything in existence, and that way he presents to all of it. But you can't touch God the way that we're present to each other. It is difficult to get our minds around this. If you think you've grasped God, if you've got a good handle on it, you really don't have a good handle on it. If you think that you've got the perfect analogy, well, there's more that we can't say about God than that which we can say about him. What's hard with people about this is they're not used to thinking in pure logic. So if you encounter someone who is struggling with this and came to the conclusion logically that there is a God or gods, I'd say that's great because that person's not an atheist anymore. Now you can talk about how Christianity differs from all these other religions, and getting to this point with an atheist is major progress right there. Okay. So next, our next one is the argument from design. Okay. So the argument from design basically says, we perceive that the universe is both orderly and not necessary, which we talked about in the last one. That which is orderly and necessary is the product of intelligence. In other words, something caused it to exist. So the conclusion is there must be an intelligence behind the universe, and that intelligence we call God. Okay? So imagine you were on a desert island, okay? And you came across the beach and you see the words SOS carved in the sand. What would you find more reasonable for an explanation? That the ocean just happened to fold the sand into an SOS, or that someone wrote it? Which option would you choose?
Second
Would you
one.
say the waves washing up in the shore wrote it, or someone actually wrote it in the sand?
We're going to think somebody wrote it.
Yeah, I would too. I don't think the waves are going to do that. You know, or similarly, you're on a desert island, and an island you thought was deserted, and you walk further in and you see a hut, right? With a door, windows, walls, roof. What would you assume? That the last hurricane came in and blew all these things together that way? Or would you assume someone built it?
Built.
Yeah, someone built it, right? I mean, you're all thinking this is like silly, but think about it. The universe is like that. When you look out at the universe, when you open up your eyes and start looking around, you see in it a startling amount of order and purpose behind how things operate. That, in very simple terms, points to and indicates that there was a mind and intelligence behind it. This is probably one of the simplest arguments for God's existence. It's one that you can come to by standing under the stars on a clear night out in the country. And by the way, it's on this very simple idea is under violent attack from the atheists because they know if they give an inch on this one, their whole atheism thing unravels. So don't expect this to be an easy discussion. But in terms of being intuitive, it's probably one of the simpler ones to see. If you love science, or you know someone who does love science, there's a modified version of this argument that involves the fine-tuning of the universe. Some Christian scientists have discovered and contend that if the conditions at the Big Bang had been a fraction of a degree hotter or cooler, you would not have had the circumstances that would later happen to produce life. Now, what they have further discovered that if any of the basic forces, the nuclear forces, gravitation, any of those things were off a fraction, none of us would exist today. If things had been a little bit different, you would never have gotten the gravitational forces or the constants of physics necessary to hold the universe in existence. If you want to read or hear more about this, how many have heard of Father Robert Spitzer? Raise your hand if you've heard of Father Robert Spitzer. Okay. He has a website. It's called the Magis, M-A-G-I-S Center for Faith and Reason. And it's a great place to go to see some of the latest developments in science and theology, all right? However, you don't need to have a degree in science to make this argument from design. You can also make it from a logical standpoint. So I'm going to so if you would, allow me to walk you through it and explain it, right? So the first premise of this is that we perceive that the universe is both orderly and not necessary, all right? And then that which is orderly, not necessary, is a product of intelligence, something that had to conceive of it and then produce it. So therefore, there must be an intelligence behind the universe, and that intelligence we call God. Now, good arguments must have a clarity in the terms used. Here we are saying two things about the universe. First, that it is orderly, and secondly, it's not necessary. So when we use the term orderly and not necessary, do we and the atheists share a common understanding of those terms? All right. So what do we mean by orderly? It means the universe is predictable, that you could run scientific experiments on it. Okay. Whoops, back up. Okay, yeah, the universe is predictable, that we could run experiments in the same time, in the same place. If you run that experiment again somewhere else, you get the exact same results and consequently be able to predict certain future events, right? It is the consistency of the universe that allows science to even happen, right? That experiments have predictability, repeatability. That's how science works. And the universe reflects this stability. If the universe were not stable, then we could not run repeatable experiments because the results would differ every day. So imagine if the plane's wings, right, and the lift necessary to get a plane off of ground, say those rules of the universe changed every day. I don't think any of us would be getting on a plane, right? We just wouldn't. It just wouldn't happen, right? So the universe is orderly, but it's also not necessary. And it seems to me an odd thing to say, but when you look at the universe, we perceive it as it is. But the universe could also have been a little bit different. For instance, spiders have 8 eyes, right? But they could have 9, or they could have only had 4. Why 8? How did that happen? Insects have 6 legs. Why not 7? Why not 8 like arachnids? Or why not 10? So there are puzzling questions we attempt to answer by doing experiments. But the point here is that we cannot figure out the universe just with a pen and paper and logic. We need to get out into the world and observe, make notes, and then make predictions based on the data. Then you test the predictions so you can make a hypothesis that states, this is what we see in the universe. Now, I want you to notice what I've described is the whole reason why science works in the universe. So if you got someone who's struggling with God's existence but happens to be very scientific, this argument might be helpful because you're basically asking them, why is it that you can run experiments in this world. How did that particular thing come about? That's a really good question to ask someone like that, okay? Premise 2, right? All right, I got my notes messed up here a little bit, but here you go. I'm gonna back up. Premise 2 basically says that there is beauty, stability, and predictable laws of nature in the universe. And because beauty, stability, and predictable laws of nature are not necessary, they are therefore the product of intelligence. They come from an intelligent mind. So there's got to be an intelligent mind behind the universe, and that intelligent mind we call God. So is everybody following this one? Yes, no?
My brain hurts a little bit, but I'm trying.
I'm trying to understand why the question, why can you run experiments in this world and how that fits? I kind of got stuck right there.
Okay, so the fact that an experiment, for instance, we know that at sea level, water will boil at a particular temperature, right?
Right.
So if you go at sea level anywhere in the world and run that experiment, water will always boil at that temperature, right? That's just part of the laws of physics, okay?
Right.
And there are many other, examples like that. Water will freeze at what degrees, at what temperature? That's true wherever you go, all right? As long as it's pure water, right? As soon as you add salt to it, that changes, right? But if it's pure water, it always freezes at the same. That's the repeatability that's in the universe, okay? So when you see a molecule of iron, right, of iron ore, it's always the same chemical compound. It's repeatable, and it's going to react very predictably with acids, okay? That's what we mean by repeatability in the universe. Science would not be possible if those things were not repeatable, okay? Just not possible. Does that help?
Absolutely. Perfect.
So you ask somebody, why is it that you can even run experiments, right? And they have to answer the questions because, well, all these experiments are predictable. We always know that when we add this reagent to this compound, we're going to get this reaction. If they couldn't guarantee that reaction, it's very difficult to run an experiment. They can't rely on it to do what it normally does. Okay? And so when they start thinking about why does that even happen, they have to confront the fact that there is an intelligence that made that possible.
Are you, Deacon Mark, I'm sorry. So are you saying that they would question why, like the catch question here for them to ponder would be, so why is there reliability? Where does the reliability come from?
Exactly.
Exactly. Okay.
That is exactly the question. It's not it's not a catch question as much as, I mean, I understand what you're saying, but it's a question that, in a sense, forces them to ponder how it is that they can even run experiments to begin with.
Yeah, that's what I meant by catch question, not to catch them or no. Okay, yeah, thank you. That's a very good explanation.
The universe is, the laws of nature, right, very predictable, right? And there's still things they're trying to answer. But again, science depends on that predictability, period, okay? And so if you ask them, where does that predictability come from? That's when they have to start considering the intelligence that exists outside the universe, okay? All right, now, classwork. Take about 2 minutes. I want you to write down every objection you can think of to the argument from design, all right? To the argument that there's an intelligence that exists outside the universe. What are some possible objections to that argument? Now, these are some of the arguments that some of the famous atheists like Dawkins and others, have used, all right? So if you're not familiar with them, that's all right, we'll touch on it a little bit, but come up with some how would you object to this?
I have one.
Do you have an objection?
Evolution
Evolution, yeah, you're out of order. No.
or survival of the fittest.
Survival of the fittest, okay. Who wants to throw an objection out there? You got one, Mike? Look like you're pondering.
No, my head went to evolution first,
Okay.
but somebody made a statement to me, you can't intellectualize your way to faith. So to me, doesn't the scientist basically say, you want to personalize this and turn this into a God, but this is all about force and energy and, I get the order disorder piece, but my feeling is the true atheist takes the personal piece out of this whole thing and turns it into something, and the human weakness creates this thing called God.
Yeah, so that's interesting. So something I like to tell people of faith is that every atheist I've ever met has a reason for wanting God to not exist, right? And it's personal, and it's usually very personal.
No, exactly. I agree with that statement.
But what we're talking about here today is getting rid of the objections, right? The easy objections that atheists offer to avoid getting to the personal side of faith, right? Because if these arguments go away, if they accept the fact that there is an intelligence outside the universe, right? And they accept the argument for contingency and design, you now have an opening to start talking about the personal elements of faith, right? So what we're doing here is we're getting rid of this baggage that's in front that keeps you from having that discussion.
Yeah.
Okay. I think, Mike, if you think about it that way, I think it maybe clears it up for you a little bit.
Maybe.
Does that make sense?
No, it does. So I'm trying to figure out, I read Dawkins 25 years ago. And,
yeah.
And honestly, I guess because I've now, over the last, especially 3 years, really dismiss all of those arguments, I haven't really thought much about them.
Yeah, you have, but more and more people are glamming onto these things, right?
Maybe.
And so, and they use these things as a kind of body armor, to their soul to keep from having discussions of faith and God and meaning in this life. Okay. And so until we disarm these arguments, right, in a very pastoral, loving way, it's very difficult to have that discussion about faith.
Yeah.
Okay. And that's what this course is about. Although I don't think we've ever come out and said that. Okay. So some would argue that given enough time, the universe developed all these stable processes through iterative trial and error over billions of years. Now, one atheist argued that given enough time, you could set a monkey in front of a typewriter and the monkey would eventually type out in its entirety Shakespeare's Hamlet. I believe that was Dawkins that made that argument. Now, that's ridiculous, but most of the objections tend to be mathematical in nature. They tend to say everything is chance. However, science is developing more evidence every year that shows none of this could be by chance. For example, scientists have a very good handle on the amount of energy and matter required to conduct random trial and error experiments, and every experiment iteration consumes energy and matter. So scientists have also a good idea of the total mass and energy contained within the universe. So consequently, scientists have calculated that the energy and mass required to reach the universe's current level of complexity by a random iterative process would far exceed what is known to be available in the universe, and the time required would well exceed the 15 billion years the universe has been in existence. And so science itself has said, and it's starting to show, it could not have been random trial and error over billions of years. There wasn't enough mass, not enough energy, and not enough time. Okay? It just couldn't. All right? Now, I'm done, but I do have a video for you. Mike, you've seen this, but many of you have not. So we're going to put this up now. I think Terry's going to share it. This is an interesting video put on by That Man Is You that shows the convergence of science with the Genesis account. You'll find this very fascinating.
But you know, there's a man, Werner Heisenberg, who won the Nobel laureate in physics in 1932. And Werner Heisenberg said that the first swallow from the cup of natural science makes atheist, but at the bottom of the cup, God is waiting. And I think for so many of us, that's what happens is, again, we don't look beyond what's apparent. We take that first sip and we think that we're done, but at the bottom of the cup, God is waiting. Our goal should be to go to the bottom of the cup, where we can, in fact, find God smiling at us, saying, hey, been waiting for you. And I'd like to do that this morning to show how this can come together, that we can actually be men who fully embrace, yes, the findings of modern science. God has given us a mind. He expects us to use it, and at the same time, fully embrace our faith. That's setting our mind on the things above. That's the three wisdoms, right? Where we do faith and reason, and then that faith has a component that's also that mystical knowledge. For our minds to be fully human and our hearts to be fully expanded, we have to be able to function in both spheres. And to do that, what I'd like to challenge us this morning to do is take what is probably one of the most difficult things to reconcile faith and science over, and that's the creation of the universe. Indeed, I would suggest that if there's ever one place in science that the first sip made atheists, it's this issue of cosmology, where we go through and we look and we say, okay, the universe was created 13.8 billion years ago, and boom, that's not like Genesis said 6 days. And so all of a sudden we throw it out, or we feel like there's this tension. What I'd like to do this morning, with the help of a brilliant man, is I'd like to bring back together faith and science in a way that helps us to set our minds above, to see all that God has created us to see and to be. To do that, let's start with modern science's understanding of the creation of the universe. Now, this is 100% just according to the findings of modern science. Well, modern science says that the universe was created 13.8 billion years ago in an explosion of light that released all the energy and matter in the universe. That energy and matter began to coalesce into stars, and 200 million years later, the first stars were born 13.6 billion years ago. Over time, those stars began to form into galaxies. Our own Milky Way galaxy and the main disk stars began to form about 7.75 billion years ago. Within that Milky Way galaxy, we have our own sun. And our sun was formed about 4.6 billion years ago. Move a little closer to home, only 100 million years later, the earth was formed, so that it was formed about 4.5 billion years ago. The earth was originally very, very hot, and it cooled until liquid water could form 3.8 billion years ago. Within just 200 million years of the formation of water, we had the first life on Earth, single-cell algae, 3.6 billion years ago. That algae began to have the process of photosynthesis, breathing in carbon dioxide and releasing oxygen in the air. Over the next 1.5 billion years, the Earth's atmosphere became oxygen-rich. The sky became a beautiful blue, and for the first time, the sun and the moon became visible from Earth. Well, 500 million years ago, there was an explosion of life that is called the Cambrian explosion of life that happened in the ocean. And almost all of the animal phylum existing to this day appeared with geographic suddenness. That life began in the ocean, but it made its way on land. Famously, the dinosaurs became extinct about 65 million years ago, until finally we arrive at human beings, to you and I, who can sit here and contemplate the meaning of all of these mysteries. Well, that is the scientific understanding of our universe. And I would say nothing seems further from that than the story of creation contained in the first chapter of the book of Genesis, where God said, "Let there be light, let there be a firmament in the heavens." Well, again, the first sip of science makes atheists, but if we'll go to the bottom of the cup, we'll find God. And that's what a man by the name of Gerald Schroeder did. Gerald Schroeder is one of those really brilliant kind of guys, and that is he has a BS, an MS, and a PhD from MIT. His PhD is in nuclear physics, and so he and MIT, of course, is probably considered our nation's leading scientific university, and so he's a really smart guy, specifically in this area. He's been present at the detonation of 6 nuclear bombs. And in fact, when that last bomb went off, and as he said, I watched half a mountain disappear before my eyes, I told myself, Gerald, you need to start thinking about what you're doing, because I have a PhD in nuclear physics, which means I'm a doctor of philosophy in nuclear physics, so I'm supposed to be philosophical about my work. Well, he's been extensively published, and he holds a patent or two. And what Gerald has started to do is to reconcile faith and reason, specifically, over this issue of cosmology. He has several best-selling books out. We're going to be guided today by his work in the science of God. Highly recommend you go out, go to Amazon, plug in Gerald Schroeder. You'll get the science of God. He's also got Genesis and the Big Bang and God according to God and the hidden face of God. So he's got several wonderful books out there. And I highly recommend that you go and look them up. And what it is Professor Schroeder had this incredible insight, and that he understood that Einstein's theory of relativity says that time is not constant. Now, I know that none of us get it, okay? And I don't get it, okay? I'm just going to follow the scientists here, okay? But what it says is time is relative based on your coordinates of where you stand in the universe. Now, here's the example that we all get. We all know that gravity changes our weight, right? So that when I'm standing on Earth, I weigh one amount. If you take me to the moon, I weigh another amount. If you take me to the sun, you could take a 200-pound person to the sun, and he's going to weigh thousands and thousands of pounds. We all get that gravity changes how much we weigh. Einstein's theory of relativity says that gravity also changes time, but to a much, much smaller extent. So let me give you an example. If you're standing on Earth today and you had someone standing on the sun and they didn't burn up, and then the Earth went one revolution around the sun, so you came exactly back to the starting point. If you're on Earth, of course, that's 1 Earth year. If you were the person standing on the sun, exact same time frame, right? Saw that same one revolution, saw your friend come boom right back to the same place. That would be 1 Earth year less 67 seconds. Yeah, I know. I can see it in your eyes. I don't get it either, okay? But in fact, Einstein's theory of relativity is not a theory. This has been proven. This has been measured. And so, in fact, the flow of time is impacted by gravity. Furthermore, another critical factor that impacts this concept of time and the flow of time is that our universe is actually expanding. And it's expanding. When it expands, the entire universe is expanding. It's just not growing at the edges. It's kind of like if you took a rubber band and you stretched that rubber band, the whole rubber band's stretching, right? And so do this. Put 2 dots on a rubber band and then stretch the rubber band. And when it's stretched, those 2 dots look like they're further apart than when the rubber band's together. Example of this in cosmology, take 7 billion years ago, have one star explode. 1 year later, in the exact same place, have a second star explode. So at the point of origin, the distance between those 2 explosions is 1 light year. They exploded 1 year apart. When I have that light travel to the Earth across 7 billion years, and in that 7 billion years, the universe is stretching. So that in fact, over the last 7 billion years, approximately, the universe has more or less doubled in size. So that when that light reaches the Earth, it looks as if those explosions occurred 2 years apart instead of 1 year apart. Well, Gerald Schroeder, understanding Einstein's theory of relativity, said, maybe we ought to think a little more deeply about this concept of science's understanding of the universe versus the scriptural revelation of the universe contained in Genesis chapter 1. And he went through and using Einstein's theory of relativity plus the stretching of the universe, he looked at what would happen if you placed 6 Earth days back at the Big Bang, not today, looking backwards, but at the Big Bang, looking forward. And this is what would happen. If you were standing at the moment of the Big Bang, which was 13.8 billion years ago, and if you placed 1 Earth day there, that Earth day would last all the way from 13.8 billion years ago all the way to 7.75 billion years ago. And during that period of time, we would, of course, have the Big Bang, and then we would have the formation of stars. And interesting enough, on day 1, in the book of Genesis, we read, God said, "Let there be light." And creation began with this explosion of light, and then the creation of the stars, the lights in the heavens. Well, then if you looked at day 2 would go from 7.75 billion years ago to 3.75 billion years ago. And during that period of time, what you would have is you would have the formation of the Milky Way galaxy, the main disk stars, as well as several other stars. And those are the stars we see at night, which is the firmament of heaven. And on day 2, God said, "Let there be a firmament amidst the heavens." Well, then we know that the earth, the sun and the earth were were formed. And then after they were formed, the earth cooled until all of a sudden liquid water formed. And then within 200 million years of liquid water, we had the first life on Earth, single cell algae. Well, all of that occurred, and on day 3, if you were going from the front, that would last from 3.375 billion years ago to 1.75 billion years ago. And in that period, you would have the formation of liquid water as well as the first life on Earth. On day 3, in the book of Genesis, we read that let the oceans, the waters be gathered together in the oceans so that the dry land can appear, and let vegetation appear. Well, we go from that, and what we said is all of that single cell algae began the process of photosynthesis, breathing in carbon dioxide and releasing oxygen. That oxygen transformed the atmosphere to be translucent, that beautiful translucent blue, and the sun and moon became visible for the first time. And that happened from 1.57 billion ago to 0.75. And God said, let the sun and moon be made. Well, they weren't made, but they became visible for the first time. Well, you go from that, and you go from 0.75 billion years ago to 0.25 billion years ago the next day. Right in the middle of that would be 500 million years ago, and that was the Cambrian explosion of life, when almost all of the animal phylums existing to this day appeared with geographic suddenness. On day 5 in the book of Genesis, we read that God said, let the waters bring forth life. We go from that to day 6, which go from 0.25 billion years until today. And what we find is that life became increasingly complex. And it moved to the land with reptiles and then mammals. And finally, it ended with us. Well, on day 6, we have let the earth bring forth creatures until God pauses to say, let us make man in our image and likeness. Suddenly, the book of Genesis sounds a lot like modern cosmology, but from different perspectives. Gerald Schroeder would say that both stories are true, and both stories tell the same story, but from 2 different perspectives. Modern cosmology stands on Earth today, and it looks back in time 13.8 billion years ago to the Big Bang. Genesis begins with nothingness. And it begins with God saying, God said, let there be light. It begins at the Big Bang, and it looks forward to our life on Earth today. If you stood at the Big Bang and looked forward to our life on Earth today, that is 6 Earth days. And that's science. The first swallow from the cup of natural science makes atheists, but when you get to the bottom of the cup, God is waiting. Believe it or not, God has given us a mind so amazing that it can do both of these things. It can embrace all the findings, the incredible findings of modern science, while being absolutely faithful to divine revelation. Indeed, the church challenges us to live according to these 3 wisdoms.
All right. Is everybody unmuted?
Yeah, they should be.
Yeah, you guys can unmute.
Do you want to not share your screen? Or unshare, stop share?
Yeah, stop share. All right, everybody. Any reactions to that?
Boom, drop the mic. That was perfect. That was perfect. That you just show that to an atheist and say, okay, now what? Basically that's amazing. I was blown away with that chart that he presented.
Anyone else? There's a lot more to this than what's up there. Okay. What he didn't mention is Gerald Schroeder is also a world-renowned Torah scripture scholar. So he brings some interesting insight to understanding the original Hebrew in which the Genesis was written.
Wow.
Okay.
He also has on YouTube a couple of videos where he explains the 5 proofs of God using the W map, which is even more beautiful than this. It's really great.
What is that called?
Is the 5 proofs of God?
Julie, can you share that in the chat, the link to that?
Yes, I can. There's also a video set put on by Steve Bolin called Hope Undimmed, where he explains it again too. It's really excellent.
Yeah, I have read all 4 of his books, and I would highly recommend them all.
Whose book?
Gerald Schroeder,
Okay.
The Science of God, Genesis and the Big Bang, God According to God. Those are all very good books.
And he speaks English. He doesn't, I mean, it's easy to understand what he says.
Yeah, although it wouldn't hurt to have a class in physics, but but yes, you can get through the books without your head exploding. Isn't that right, Mike?
There's all kinds of formulas, and it's heavy stuff. Yeah. You know, by the way, and I found that stuff really fascinating. I do think the atheist will still reduce this somehow to, that's a nice depiction. But when you read you have to almost read the science behind it, that whole time, space thing. He uses all these examples that do blow your head away about if you could recreate these certain things. And the way I interpreted it all, time for God is different than time for us.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
That's how I reduce it.
Doesn't it say that in the Bible?
Yeah, well.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah. So to me, our version of time is different. And so what I like about that depiction is, yep, God created this whole thing. And that is a great way to reduce it in terms of perhaps how he would look at it. But even that is to me, it's us trying to reduce all this to something that we just will never understand.
Yeah.
The science behind it is absolutely fascinating. It is fascinating.
It is. We got about 2 minutes left, so I'm going to throw something out that I think is going to make your heads explode. No. All right. So here it is. So at the moment of the Big Bang, what scientists have determined that the amount of forces to contain all the matter and energy in the universe had to be massive. Matter of fact, so massive, they can't even calculate. They got to use, kind of made up numbers to come up with the force required to contain it all in that little pinpoint. And then one scientist says, okay, that's a big number. But he says, how big is the number to describe the force that released it? And it's mind-boggling, right? But what they do know is at the moment of the Big Bang, what was the first? It was an explosion of what? Light, was it not?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, who's the light of the world? Who's the light of the world?
God, Jesus.
Jesus, right. Through whom was the world made?
Us.
Jesus.
Father,
Jesus.
Son, and Holy Spirit.
No. Right?
Oh.
The world's made through him, right?
Yeah.
So God created, but the world was made through Jesus, right? Jesus is the light of the world. At the point of the Big Bang, the first thing was an explosion of light, right? Okay? Now I want you to think about that. Now, light right now defies any unifying principle. It is both energy and it's both matter, okay? Jesus is both human and divine. Also very difficult for our minds to grasp, okay? But he's also the light of the world. The other thing to think about here is you and I and everything around us is made from light. We started off as light. So I'll leave you with that interesting combination of science and theology there.
There's something else on, I can't remember where I read this, but they said that God invented time after the original sin as a gift to us.
So that we wouldn't have to live in the suffering forever. It wouldn't be an unending
Right.
succession of days.
Yeah. Well, that's when, I mean, that's St. Thomas Aquinas, when some smart aleck atheist back then asked him, what did God do before he created the universe? And Aquinas said, we didn't have the time. Yeah.
Well, and I also heard that it might be the same book that Terry's reading. That's why but it said that when people doubt, how can God listen to all of our hearts and answer all of our prayers? And when millions of people are saying a prayer at the same moment, and it's because God doesn't have time. And so he does hear us all individually, but we can't get our minds around that because we're so clued into the time, and he doesn't have to deal with time. So he can do it.
Yeah. It also presumes God doesn't have the mental capacity to do it all at once. Right.
Well, yeah, that's something else we don't know.
I mean, that's throwing a very human thing. We're not very good at multitasking. I suspect God is the ultimate expert.
Multitasker, yeah, right.
Right.
Uh-huh.
We aren't.
It's kind of unimaginable for us to think to be in a place where we're timeless and without any boundaries or limits, and that's where God is. And I think that's why so many people have problems with it, because we're so entrenched in our bodies and our earthly selves, and where God is not there. He's not from, like you said before, he's not from this universe. He's over all of us. So
Yeah. So Gerald Schroeder has an interesting perspective on Adam and Eve and the first human beings with immortal souls. And I'm still trying to reconcile that with church teaching. So I won't say too much about that, because some atheists will go back to, because according to the Jewish calendar, I guess, human beings have been on earth, 7,800 years, something like that. It's about 7,800 years. And he's reconciled that. And I'm not sure that it's consistent with church teaching, or the church is simply silent on this. So I'm still researching that. Okay. But he does make it clear that in the Hebrew, in Genesis, when it talks about Adam, it talks about neshma, which means God breathed spirit. In other words, an immortal soul was placed into him. And he goes logically, if you look at other Hebrew, in that section and the way they describe things, there were other human beings, at that time, but they did not have immortal souls. And so that's the implication that he raises. And so I'm still trying to understand that in light of church teaching on Adam and Eve.
Deacon Mark, before we leave, may I ask you, would you please tell us again the book you recommended in the beginning of the class by Peter Kreeft, and also Father
The Handbook of Christian Apologetics.
Yeah, easy.
Okay, thank you. And also, what was Father Spitzer's website?
Magis, M-A-G-I-S. I think it's
Magis Center.
Yeah, Magis Center, M-A-G-I-S Center. I think if you just look up Spitzer, S-P-I-T-Z-E-R, Father Robert Spitzer, you'll get there.
Okay, thank you. And what did Julie, I didn't see it in the chat, but she mentioned the YouTube videos by Gerald Schroeder, 5 proofs of something, 5 proofs of God's existence.
Yeah, I think if you go out on YouTube and just put in Schroeder, and it's S-C-H-R-O-E-D-E-R.
Okay.
And it's Gerald, G-E-R-A-L-D.
Thank you.
You can also just Google the 5 proofs of God.
Yeah, you can do it
I
that
think
way.
so. Okay.
And it
Thank
gives you a lot of the different talks that he gives.
Yeah. So Gerald Schroeder is getting up there in years. I think he's retired back to Israel now, is where he lives. Anybody have any questions or comments?
I'd like to thank you for presenting the light thing right here at the tail end. That was, it just doesn't, it just is mind boggling to me, I'm sure as to all of us, how people cannot believe or want to believe. The other question that I have never thought to ask people, and this was mentioned in the very first class as well. I think you began that class, Deacon Mark, and I've been wanting to ask you, but I don't have your phone number, is you asked us a question in the very first class, and I think maybe it was, why do we want God to exist? Did you ask that question?
No, yeah. So the question is to ask an atheist, why do you want God to not exist?
Well, that's the other thing I was going to say is that I have never thought about asking someone. And to me, that's a key question. But the very first class, I think you asked all of us, why do we want God to exist?
Why is God important to you?
Maybe that's what it was. And that was a very good question to ask us. And then to have been presented to us to ask people. And I heard Terry mention this in other classes too, like why do you want God not to exist? I think that would really bring up some good conversation, I think.
Well, it needs to be paired with the even better question that Terry asked is, tell me about the God you don't believe in. Because you'll find out their understanding of God is not our understanding either, right? So you have common ground. They have misunderstanding of God. So you got 2 questions really to ask them. Now, the first question, why do you want God to not exist? When you ask that question, you have to be willing and ready to make a journey with them because it's going to get personal, right? Because you're not going to get to the real reason until you ask about 10 more questions. And it's usually something very personal. And a lot of times it's tied up with a sin that they do not want to give up.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Or a fear that
Or a fear, yeah.
they can't be happy living God's way.
Yeah, or a fear that they're going to give up freedom somehow, right? And so, and sometimes that freedom's tied up with behavior that's not necessarily constructive or good, but it's something that they quote like, or they don't want to admit that they're a slave to some, aberration of behavior or whatever. Okay. So the point is, my question means you're prepared to go pretty deep, and they better be, or you're just going to get them angry. Right. Whereas Terry's question is more of an invitation to dialogue. Tell me about the God you don't believe in. All right. So understand they're 2 very different questions. All right. So the first question you do with someone who's already a pretty good friend and that you have a pretty open relationship with.
Yes. Right.
The second one sort of gets you there, and it shows that you have an interest in understanding how they think. Okay.
I also think one thing people are afraid of is that the Catholic Church isn't going to be compassionate. Like you hear a lot of young people say because they're accepting all these different things, transgender, homosexuality, that somehow they're being compassionate by doing that, and they're afraid that the church isn't compassionate, and so they'll be labeled as uncompassionate which means they don't understand what the church actually teaches in that area.
Well, it's also a misunderstanding. What is true compassion? Is it true compassion to allow somebody to continually harm themselves? Is it true compassion to allow someone to live a falsehood? And I would suggest to you that that's not true love. Okay. And so a lot of times our younger generation has a total misunderstanding of what compassion is. And they view compassion as live and let live. Right. But if you truly love someone, you know, it's just like when you're raising your kids and they want to touch the toaster and you say, don't do it, it's hot, you know, and they don't know what hot is. You know, someday you just let them touch it, right? And they got these 5 little blisters on their fingers. Now they know what hot is. And you say, don't touch it hot, they're not going to do it, right? But you have to teach them. And that's and that's, you know, a lot of people object to the Catholic Church saying we're not compassionate. You know, we don't embrace those people. Yeah, we do embrace those people. We don't embrace the behavior.
Hey, Mark.
Yeah, Mike.
And I'm curious yours and Terry's opinion on this. This is not judgment. So
yeah,
the last 10 minutes actually, to me, is more relevant to the issues that I see out there today. So, and we went through this in That Man Is You, where we devoted 33% of our 13 weeks to the evolution and faith reason. Do you and Terry think, as a percentage of the issues that are out there facing all churches, do you think the atheism problem trumps the bigger issue that the world today actually does believe in a God, but the way they reconcile it is the issue? Either they're lazy, they don't want to spend the time. And to me, that's the thing I grappled with for the last 3 years. And if I listen to even some of our non-denominational buddies, they would actually say the bigger issue isn't the fact that atheism exists. The bigger issue are the nuns out there.
Well, but how do you define a nun?
Well, there's another survey out there that says if you actually ask people, do you believe in a higher being, a superior being, not necessarily the Catholic God we believe in, but that the majority, and I define the majority as 80 or 90%, would say, yes, we do. I do believe it, and I do believe that exists.
But the problem with that, Mike, and I understand, I've seen that same survey, but they don't ask the question, describe that God.
But so that's a different, so that's what really, Terry's question that you asked earlier, if I adjusted that just a little bit, that's a very different discussion than attacking the problem. You don't believe in God, because I don't think that's the majority. I think
we have a lot of more people now. I think atheism was very popular, but I think now it's more I'm spiritual but not religious.
Right.
Is the problem. So I think what we have to do is build a foundation with this class and then move on to who is Jesus Christ and why do we need a church?
Yeah. What I'm concerned about is, are we chasing an issue that's 20 or 30 years old? We could, from that, I don't disagree with you, Mike, but I will counter with this is, if you went out and asked people in our parish, how many could even make the argument from contingency just for your own benefit, and the argument from design, right? And how it helps you understand your faith a little more. Yeah. I guess because it just came up in the last 10 minutes, when I see what we all are grappling with in our relationships with our families. Yeah. The debate or issue I don't think is, do you believe or not believe in God? The bigger issue is, and somebody just said it, and I don't think it's just the Catholic Church, although we're probably the culprits. How are we dealing with some of these bigger issues today around transgender and homosexuality? I mean, I personally grapple with those. And I guess somehow, if there's a way to use the logic of contingency and design and all those things to help me with some of that, that would be extremely valuable, I think. And that's not to say this isn't valuable. This is, like I said, I'm still fascinated when I see these videos and read the books, and it's a great reminder, but I feel like it's helping me personally continue to grow in my own faith. It's how do we grab those other people that quite candidly struggling?
I think, when you ask what God is it that you don't want to believe, that you don't believe in, for former Catholics, the nuns, I'm thinking, a good thing to say is what about the Catholic Church that you don't believe in? And that's how you find out that, for instance, our daughter, who's not going to Catholic Church anymore, has a gay couple on their cul-de-sac. And so one time we were outside, and as we walked back into the house, she had just been talking to them. As we walked back in the house, she said, "Now, how do you feel about gay people?" And I said, "Well, I think they're probably born that way, or, they're really that way. They really have same-sex attraction, but I don't think they have any more right to have sex than a priest or a nun who's taken a vow, or your sister who's not married, or your brother who's not married. They all have this cross to bear." And she knows what a struggle it is for her brother and sister who are both single when they don't want to be. And she said, "Well, that's a very interesting perspective." And I was like, what house did you grow up in? How did you not get that message? But anyway, that was very revealing, that's one thing she, takes issue with the Catholic Church.
Yep.
So, anyway, so that's what I was thinking as everybody was talking.
Well, I'm probably going to go somewhere that's probably not very comfortable, but I will go there anyways. I think some of it has to do with being catechized from the pulpit. And I think some things we need to start going back to some of those basic things. Yes, God is love. God is forgiving. God is merciful. All those things are very important. But we need to bone up our parishioners, all of us. We all need to be reminded of what the church teaches in order to be able to be good, strong representatives of the church when we are talking to family members and when we are talking to other people. And I think that's really important. And I'm not saying that it's at Holy Trinity. I've gone to 5 or 6 different churches just to see, and this is not just a Catholic thing. I went to a biblical leadership class that has to do with government, so conservative values. And surprisingly enough, a lot of the people, this was at the Baptist church down the street, Black Creek, where they had this, and there were people from other churches, from other denominations that are experiencing the same thing. So maybe we have to go back to our perspective, fundamental beliefs, and kind of say, people, God, this is what the Bible teaches. This is what we need to remember.
So let me react a little bit to that, right?
And I'm not talking about you. You know that it's not nothing. I always like everything you say, but
I'm not taking it personal at all. Look, so here's the deal. When you talk about from the pulpit in a Catholic context, right? You have the scripture readings. You have first reading, responsorial, second gospel. There's typically a theme that unites the first reading, the responsorial, and the gospel, and the second reading usually something different. Sometimes they're all three. They don't always lend themselves to some current topic, right?
Right.
And it is the torture to liturgy to force in some of this stuff. I'll just tell you that right now.
Oh, I agree.
So now, I'm not giving a pass to the clergy who absolutely avoid these things at all costs, right? But I am saying that you can't hear it every week. It just doesn't work.
No.
Right? Right. Now, generally speaking, I'm not afraid to poke the bear.
I know you.
But it has to fit with the readings and the context, and in the liturgy, it all has to work.
Right.
Okay. Otherwise, you're just, I don't know, I don't know what you call it, right? It has to work, okay? Because I've had people complain to me, every homily should be about pro-life. I said, no, it should not, okay? Because there's many elements to our faith, right? So not every homily is going to be about transgender or about homosexuality or about immigration or any of that kind of stuff, right? it has to be appropriate to the reading so you can tie it to the gospel. And if you can't do that, you're really not doing what the liturgy intends. Okay? So I'll just say that, right? So when you hear me out there, you know, pointing to the elephant in the room, it's because it fit with the readings. Okay?
Well, and I'm talking about missed opportunities. And
There's always missed opportunities, but you also got to understand.
And I apologize, but
No. There's no need to apologize. But what you need, everyone needs to realize is that the abuse that goes on behind the scenes after a homily like that is intense. Okay? And we're human just like you all, and nobody likes to take that kind of abuse. Right? And you just got to be willing to take it. And so, you got to pray for Father John, because when I say something that's controversial, although true, he's the one that still gets the heat, right? In addition to me. All right? So just bear that in mind.
I appreciate what you're saying, Deacon Mark. And I think with our culture, with regard to what Angie was saying too, because I've heard a ton of stuff, why doesn't the Catholic Church speak out more about transgenderism or gay marriage? I've heard that so many times. And what you just said about the Mass is scripturally based, and that is the essence, that is our core. And when you really think about what you just said, I don't want to say nothing else matters, because that's not accurate, because those things do matter. But what I think this is just a good reminder to us of what our essence should be. Like one time, and when I was in a conversation with Father Murphy about other books, etc., because there's such a plethora of books out there for us to indulge in that are very helpful. He just very simply said, put, one book, and he taps his hand and he goes, it's the Bible. That's the only book that we really need. And of course, I knew what he meant by saying that. It's to me, I perceive what you just said is what he was trying to point out to me, like our core.
Yes.
And so thank you for saying that. But honestly, Angie, to support what you're saying, I have heard that so many times too. And just like within our church, we have so many priests under attack that have spoken out on the national and international scene, that are being asked to resign by their bishops, because they have been so outspoken about the poor shepherding of, throughout the pandemic and the vaccination, etc. So it's just, unfortunately, it's gotten very, very messy over the decades and the recent years. But with what you just said, it just brought me back to where I really need to be every day in every moment.
Yeah, and I think part of it too is here, at least in this parish, I have a sense of gratitude that we have a pastor who supports, coming out and saying things. And so far, our bishop has, our current bishop, not all dioceses have that pleasure, right? And not all clergy has the wherewithal to stand up in front of their congregations and say some of these things, right? So, pray for them too.
I wanted to say too that even though, Mike, I agree with you that the conversations that we seem to be more confronted with would be the issue of I'm religious, but not, I'm spiritual, but not religious. So how does the Catholic Church fit in and all that with all these teachings? Because if you say you're spiritual, you can kind of accept everything and you don't have a dogma or doctrine or anything. I would say that this class, if you really watch all 4 of the classes, like we have them, I shared the link in the chat. If you go back and watch Mark's first presentation and then the one that I gave last week and then this one and the one next week, it's like Mark said, it's very foundational to have. So when you are having those conversations, you'll have this foundation of where to draw from or where, it'll be planted in your heart. For example, we talked today about God makes us more free. He doesn't limit our freedom. He's not oppressive. And we talked last week about why does he give us rules? You know, why are there rules? And he's an intelligent designer. So he's showing us how we're created, how we're made to operate fully and become the most fully alive. It's like having an instruction manual for your new smart TV. If you didn't know how to use it, you might use it for something totally different. And it's just some of it's practical. So anyway, I suggest to go back and listen to those and really pay attention to next week. Next week, we're also going to go into why does God allow suffering, which is a really big problem with people today in their understanding of God, and some other arguments from inside the person. Anyway, so.
Yeah, but I think, you know, Mike, I think the other way we could look at this is when Peter says, be prepared to defend the faith that's within you. And I think that defense takes on a lot of different perspectives depending on, you know, who you're speaking with. Right. And so to Terry's point, I mean, these are foundational.
Yeah.
So here's one thing I'm doing. I'll just address this. So I'm reading all the books I can get my hands on right now about transgender so that I can provide at some point an intelligent, well-rounded homiletic response to the transgender moment that this country's in.
Yep.
Right? Knowing full well that the truckloads of abuse that will be dumped on me beginning minutes after I finish that homily, right? Right?
Well, that depends on how you approach it, Mark, because
No, actually, Mike, no, it doesn't.
No, so having been on the other side of when you one on many,
yeah,
it really gets down to you almost have to accept there's going to be, you know,
yes,
3, 5, 10%.
yes.
If you get 90% positive reaction, you've done your job, or 80%, right? You'll never get 100. So.
Oh no, I don't go for 100, but you know what? It's running about 90. So, and I get it.
But I also want to make a comment. So I agree everything you just said, including Terry. This stuff is great. It is a great reminder, and every time, and some of it I hear over and over, and it's a great reminder, and absolutely is useful in those other conversations. There's no question about it. But I just want to make sure we as a church, I think we missed the boat 50, 60 years ago, because it's all about personal relationship. I heard something this week. I can't remember. I think somebody said about catechizing from the pulpit. I listened to one of these things right now, just started, and it's 3 priests. One of them is our own Father Mike. And somebody said, I think the words were something like, catechizing is no substitute for evangelizing. And the real focus is around the personal relationship. And that's not to take away from the catechizing and the foundational tools, getting more of that focus on personal relationship, both in your spiritual life and then with the people who we're trying to, you know, bring with us, so to say. So folks, this is really good. As you think about other material, what are those broad issues out there that the people in our parish that we're trying to drag along for the ride and help? I think there's a great hunger for some of that stuff.
There is.
And it's not from the pulpit. It is not from the pulpit. I agree everything you said about the focus of liturgy. I mean, if you can roll it into your theme, that's what you do. But I disagree with anybody that says to you, every week you should be talking about pro-life, dude.
Yeah, well, I figured you had my back on that one, Mike.
No, dude, that's crazy.
You know, but here's.
I'd like to say that, you know, our EDGE program and our Life Team program, they're working hard to tell those kids the truth, and hopefully it's going to help because, you know, a lot of kids didn't get that, you know, and so we didn't, you know, I think that's a big deal that we're really working hard on. And then Deacon Mark, have you seen, there's a Lifetime Catholic Media, a Catholic surgeon discusses transgender. You've got to listen to it. It's great.
Share it. Can you share the link?
Just share the link with us in chat. I just finished reading the book When Harry Became Sally by Ryan Anderson. Awesome book. Okay. And then I'm going to get the other one about what they're doing to our daughters. So I'm going to read that one as well.
Hey, Mike, I want to say too, you are so right. We need to combine whatever we're learning with prayer
Absolutely.
and adoration. And we need to take anything we learn in these classes to the Lord in prayer. Anything we're confronted with, that is so key.
Yep.
That is so key.
So Mike, spoiler alert, my next homily is going to be, I'm going to take on transhumanism.
Oh, boy.
When are you doing that? I want to be there.
June 23rd. It's the 12th week in ordinary time.
Okay.
So
What time?
I'd have to look. Let's see.
Okay.
What is the date of that?
Yeah.
I'll tell you in a second.
Can I say something in regards to that? We have to be careful. I'm involved very much with what's going on in school and politically. And the CRT is going to be a big issue in the school system, but so is the sex education that they're trying to promote. And I don't know if anyone's aware of that, but some of the things that they're trying to teach children in second grade of how to have intimacy without having actual sex. And it gives you a list of things that the kids can do. And this is at a second grade level.
Comprehensive sex education at CSE. It's terrible.
Okay.
So please keep an eye. I mean, some of us don't have children, but we have grandchildren. They may not live here. They may live somewhere else, but please make sure that you share that information because it's going everywhere in the United States.
All right.
And
So June 20, answer your question, June 20th, I'm doing the Life Teen Mass,
Okay.
4:30.
and you said that's transhumanism?
Yep.
I've not heard that before.
Yeah, I know. It's, I mentioned it to Terry and she got all excited because it's one of those subtle philosophies that's slowly creeping in with the advance in technology. So I don't want to do any more spoiler than that, but
Okay.
okay.
June 20th, Life
Yeah.
Teen. And
Yeah.
Angie, what were those acronyms that you used
It's a critical race theory.
Oh,
So
CRT.
CRT.
Has
Okay.
Fayette County adopted that?
Well, there's a group of us that are going to start going to the Board of Education meetings because yes, they are attempting to do this all over Georgia right now.
Yes, they are.
And we need to go to we need to be there to express our.
Terry, I will share the people who are fighting this and are educating people about this and are supporting parents who are against this. I will post this now, and so that way, if anybody wants to find out more about it, they can find out through this.
Also, provide the names of the Fayette County Board of Education people who actually support CRT. I'd like to know who on that board is actually supporting it.
Yeah, we'll find out. I can talk to Vanessa because Vanessa's been helping us know what.
Okay, because I'd like to know who those, and when they're up for election again.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for that. And what was the other course, Angie, where you mentioned they're trying second grade level?
It's called, hold on, let me,
Comprehensive Sex Education.
Comprehensive Sex Education. CSE.
Okay.
And so
Thank you so much.
Horrible.
I bet you if you researched who developed that, that would shock you.
the Planned Parenthood is behind it.
Now, there you
Yes.
go. Gee, I'm not shocked.
They're going to teach children about they don't have a gender starting in kindergarten. It's horrible.
Okay.
Well, I just wanted to say this too, with regarding with what everybody has said, with all these current issues, and you all probably feel like we're the same way, that we're just this steam locomotive barreling down the wrong track, you know? And so I appreciate everything, all this information you all are offering. And Terry, with your comment about this spirituality versus religiosity, I've heard that recently, where it seems like it's among younger sector, where it's kind of this sounds very outdated, but like a cool thing to say, I'm spiritual, but I'm not religious. And then they go into the whole cosmos thing and everything, like we should accept everything because that's true compassion and true love.
Yep.
So that is a real thing. So about.
I think that's prominent right now.
I agree. Yeah.
But I do 100% think this class is very important foundationally. And you'll see that when we finish, then I think we should go on to learn about the more specifics that we're talking about. Because of this class, I can say to people, God doesn't limit my freedom. I'm more because of him. He comes close to us and makes us better and more than we were before. He doesn't cause me to live a depressed life that I'm not going to be happy. It's very foundational. Like an intelligent designer today, he designed a male and female for a reason. And if you know that from the inside out, they can't shake your faith when you're talking about it. So I think it's very important. This class is very foundational.
It is. The other thing you hear too, equated with this, I'm a spiritual person, and this positive energy out into the universe.
Yeah, a lot of energies talk.
Yeah.
Well, I got my crystals in my pocket right now.
Yeah, because crystals are like guilt-free. You can just have energy.
Yeah.
No rules.
All right. Well, sports fans and fellow Catholics, I got to go, but.
The link I shared in there it says Answering Atheism Session 1. That's Mark's talk from today will be on there with his slides, but that's the webpage that's now got the first 2 lessons, the videotapes of the talks, the slides, some extra stories and things on there that we covered. And anyway, so just know it's there for you if you want to go back and look at it again.
Yeah. All right. Well, I appreciate you all being here today. I'll be back at 6:30 if you really want to punish yourself and repeat. But it's good seeing all of you, and God bless.
Thanks, man.
Thanks, Mark.
Bless you. Thanks.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Terry.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.